Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor, Greg Dooley, and the Pundit, Steve Clarke. Men, take the mic.
And welcome, everyone. This is the inaugural podcast of the Professor and the Pundit, presented by Nick Hopwood and Peak Wealth Management.
I am the Professor, Greg Dooley.
And I am the Pundit, Steve Clarke. Welcome, everybody. This is a first type of venture for the two of us doing something like this, and I hope you enjoy it. We've got a number of things that we're going to be talking about during the off-season leading up into Michigan football, and I think one of the more fascinating things right away is the fact that the Professor is really a professor. And that's a new venture you started out last year, and you've got a class coming up about NIL.
Yeah, so this time last year, as you know, I was in corporate America, and I wrapped up effectively my regular career, had an opportunity to teach at Michigan, and so now I teach 3 classes at Michigan, and the third one is a course on NIL, name, image, and likeness. It's an academic kind of view of NIL, and it's the first of its kind, certainly that I'm aware of at Michigan. There's a few other schools that I know that do something like this, but we're starting it on Tuesday kind of as a pilot. And when I say pilot, kind of an experimental class. And
sort of like this show right now.
This actual show right now. The thing is, this class has been in the works for, unfortunately, only a few weeks. It was when I found out, hey, it's going to go, and it's going to go in the spring. But we've been talking about doing a podcast, Steve, for about, 5 years now?
5 years, because we didn't think anybody would listen. We entertain ourselves, but stick around. It's a podcast. If you're listening to it in the car on the way up north or going down south, I think we'll be entertaining enough to at least keep a conversation going. But, Greg, first of all, the idea of going from corporate America to teaching at U of M, where the money factor and the income is significantly less. This is a trend I'm seeing from people in our age group, people in their earlier 50s, very successful in what they did from their 20s out of college, getting to be about 50 years old, and starting to see, I've got enough money, so to speak. I think I want to start doing things that I really want to do before I really, really retire.
Yeah, and moderately successful for sure. And yeah, so I have seen this trend. I can tell you the way I was wired, like we grew up, it was still the notion, the idea of saying it, not being an entrepreneur or having your own business was really foreign. The common path was to go work for a corporation, get your metaphorical gold watch, and retire. And then through our careers and my career, people have moved jobs more frequently. But I see is a lot of people feel stuck, they're languishing in their jobs, and I got to say, I felt that way. And it was really tough for me, but I felt that way for a while before doing this. And I think I was still effective at my job and good at my job, but I wasn't enjoying it like I used to. And yeah, and there are sacrifices when you go do something you love, which I do, and I've really, really enjoyed working at U of M and teaching these classes. And the other two, by the way, are the history of college athletics, which is a passion of mine, and the other one is a class called Leading by Coaching, where we talk to athletic coaches and they talk about leadership lessons. But leading those two classes, and they're pretty popular classes at U of M, really has been transformational. And I'll tell you, I am certainly a coin-operated person. Money matters to me. In fact, there's a reason why the lead sponsor of this show is a wealth advisor. It's because I have a relationship with him because we have common interests. It means a lot to me, but there are sacrifices. But I'm telling you, the enjoyment of doing what I'm doing far outweighs, say, the financial benefits, if you will, of working at U of M.
So leadership by coaching and the history of college athletics, these are not two startup classes that you started with.
Yeah, so John Bacon, our friend, WTKA personality, journalist, he actually created both classes. And he created the history of college athletics about 15 years ago. It's the notion of kind of answering this question, how did we get this uniquely American phenomenon where hundreds of thousands of people watch their college teams, live and die for them. But it's not the top of the sport. The top of the sport, of course, is the NFL. You share that notion with someone, say, from London. They look at you like you have 3 heads, when you explain to them, I love this example, they know who Tom Brady is. You tell them that Tom Brady played for bigger crowds in college than he does in the NFL, they don't even understand what you're talking about. And it kind of gets into, how did this happen? How did we get here? From a very, very Michigan lens. Because most of the dynamics, whether it be the growth of the game, compensation, issues of gender and race, right? They played out here in Ann Arbor with college athletics. And that's really what that one gets into.
So tell me what you have done to make it your own. And I find it fascinating, not just because you're my friend, but the idea that you've never taught anything in front of students before. Tell me what you were able to do in just your first couple of semesters in terms of the topics you brought in and the guest that you were able to bring in to talk to your students.
Well, it's funny. So it's a good thing this is a podcast, Steve, because we can go on about this one. But what I've found is I've actually used, you talk about the transition from corporate America, I've actually used more of the skills that I picked up working on Capitol Hill in D.C. I was a poli-sci major at Michigan, from a brief stint in finance to IT consulting to executive leadership in IT. I've used more skills from across my career in the short time that I've been here to organize, build relationships, network, execute, plan in this career, if you call it that, than I really had at the end of my career and all the things I was doing. And so how did I make it my own? It started with leveraging what I think I was good at, which is public speaking with groups and sending a message, which I have done a lot of, using technology, using the tools available to me to present, to use the tools available at U of M. It was a natural fit for me to understand how to use their learning management system. I have kids the age of the students, so I think there was a little bit of I could relate to them. So a lot of things from my life, a lot of things from my career translated it to it. But then there's the work. What am I talking about for 80 minutes, 24 lectures over a semester for 2 classes? So my strategy was, I'm going to share what I know. I'm going to bring my insight. But where I can find someone to talk about Title IX and the impact, and can talk about how it impacted their life, and then became the all-time winningest coach in softball. Of course, I'm talking about Carol Hutchins. I'm going to see if I can get Hutch in. And I've met Hutch around. We've been around. It's a small town. But I'm going to use my networking skill. I'm going to contact her. I'm going to reach out to her. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to tell her what I'm trying to do here and get her in to talk about Title IX. Hutch was easy because she's done this class before. But connecting with President Ono, the president of the university, to talk about the role of presidents in athletics and where's that fit, where's that marriage in his view. And getting those guests was important. And by the way, I love talking about what I'm talking about. I think it's all interesting, but I know my students don't want to stare at me for 24 lectures for 80 minutes a day. So I try to spice it up and make it entertaining.
And you did just that. You've had a lot of the current head coaches at University of Michigan speak in your class. You've had former head coaches like John Beilein speak at your class as well. And I got to tell you, you're in here for 1 year and you're finishing the winter semester. And the first thing people want to do is, Greg, can you do more? Please do more. And let's do something. Let's do something that we're creating from scratch, which is NIL.
Well, that's nice of you. I don't know if people were pounding on my door. I think it was more like they wanted someone to teach the class. But I raised my hand because I kind of wanted to keep the momentum going of what I love to do. So it's interesting. So the NIL class is happening, and it's within the School of Education. Well, why is it there? But the School of Education is on the front line of things like not only education, how do we educate people, but also on issues of equity, inequity, and really the whole notion of behind NIL is about kind of fixing something that was unfair and fixing, kind of looking at a system, the NCAA and the conferences and all the money that's being sloshed around, and looking at where the athletes fit in and giving them fair share. So there's a huge equity component, and that was the motivation from the School of Ed. Now, why so soon? Why spring term? I think part of the answer is why not? We have enough here. Let's go with it. So as we speak, I am methodically putting together the course plan. I'm lining up speakers. So I do have people from the athletic department coming in. I've got tax people coming in. I've got contract law people coming in with the students. We're talking about marketing. And yeah, we're talking about the history of compensation, fairness, how the game grew, how did we ended up here. And we're going to take a big look at the NCAA in its nature, how this system got created. And there's a lot of questions, man.
Speaking of NIL and collectives, how many of them are out there at U of M right now looking out for U of M's athletic interest and their own?
Well, it's a good question because part of this process has been I've been trying to reach out and talking to and networking with all of what I call the stakeholders involved with this. And many of them are those collectives. So I've sat down with several of the principals, if you will, behind the collectives. So right now, I'd say there are probably 5 or 6 where people can still donate or support as fans, meaning you can provide money to this collective. And through one means or another, some of it will be distributed to student athletes. That's how they work. The notion is we all get together, collect our money, and we can support a team or a player or something like that. There are 3 primary ones that are kind of dictating the pace of what's going on, and they have different flavors. One's more like a benefit to more of the Olympic sports. And then you've got 2, one set up as for-profit, but it's trying to help individual athletes and connect them with companies and deals. And you got a third entity that's a tax-free entity, which by design, it's supposed to be a peanut butter spread of effectively a flat base amount. I'll just use the example of football, where each football player gets $20,000 to $40,000 a year and has to do some charity work behind it. It's kind of fascinating. Right now, I can tell you that it doesn't seem like any of them are well funded, as in Steve and Ross funded, because I still think there's a lot of people trying to figure out who am I giving it to, where is it going, will these guys be around in a couple of years? And it's definitely a cornerstone of what we're going to talk about.
Well, and the other thing to me when this was first brought about is, it's got to be funded by somebody, right? And then I think about, well, what are these people getting out of it? Are they just doing it from the love of their heart? Now, you're doing classes out of the love of your heart, but these people who are funding NIL, they're thinking of themselves too. Some are wealthy independent owners who may want the name attached to a building or to a title, but otherwise just may want to give back. And then you have some people that are very good at a small business, yet not independently wealthy enough that this is sort of an investment, a way and a tool to increase exposure for their main company in order to raise sales and improve profits. So you start to wonder, what are they getting out of it and what would they possibly try to accomplish? And I think that's maybe one of the reasons why athletic departments across the country are a little wary about having business partners like this.
They are. And so when we're talking about the big money, okay, let's just use a big number like $1 million, $10 million, which is what really the size of investment that these guys need often to make a difference with a player. Certainly with the team, okay, if you're talking about a football team and everyone getting, $40,000, you're looking at millions of dollars. You put yourself in the shoes of a big donor. What a big donor's like? Well, what do? They put their names, very few are anonymous, right? They put their name on the coach. What's Harbaugh? Is it the Ira Nikki Harris head football coach?
Right.
Ward Manuel, is he the Donald Shepard? Well, he's got a name on him, right? There's the Stephen Ross Athletic Campus. They like their name on things. They like to know there's a legacy for a lot of reasons. They like to know that their gift is going to keep on giving. They like sideline passes. They like access.
Yes.
They like a tax donation. So the dollar for dollar donation, these are people who are well off the standard deduction. Okay, they get to deduct portion of their charitable work. They like to get that tax deduction, so $1 million isn't $1 million, right, to them. So they like all those things. They also, no one wants to give, say, $5 million to an organization that just was created. Note that, Steve, we probably aren't going to get $1 million for our podcast. That hasn't started yet, right?
But we're hopeful.
Yeah, we're hopeful if anyone out there is listening. We do plan to be around a while. But you want to know if these guys are going to be around. By the way, there are a lot of other questions, not only about Is this organization going to be around? Is this going to be allowed? Is the NCAA going to pivot and turn athletes into employees? Are they going to let athletic departments actually run or be more involved in collective because they're hands off right now? If I'm a donor, I'm like, well, what? Here's the other thing. What about revenue sharing? Okay, what do I mean by that? There's a $7+ billion TV contract. There's a lot of people. Many would argue that A, athletes deserve a chunk of that, and B, that it's coming soon. How about apparel? The Fab Five, famously protested and sold a ton of shoes. They sold more Nike Huarache basketball shoes, black socks, shorts, jerseys. By the way, the students are still wearing all the Fab Five. I know there's overlap with some of the team, but they're still wearing all the Fab Five jerseys on campus. It cracks me up. But where's mine? And so that's a key question. If that comes to play, where does NIL fit in, right? Does it become more of a collective bargaining situation, more akin to the NFL, right, where the players, the athletes, get a certain portion of that? So if I'm sitting on the sideline looking at 3 to 5 collectives that basically started in the last year with a swirling NCAA policy, with court cases going on, with state laws all over the place, I'm not sure I'm writing a check, Steve, for $10 million tomorrow because I want to see what happens, right? Michigan has a lot of money. Talk about the Michigan money cannon. There is a lot of money out there. There are people that, under the right circumstances, are willing to get involved and get and support these teams and these collectives. But can you blame them for hesitating a little bit?
No, probably not. But the kids who are being recruited are acting on what's happening today because that's their mindset. For every place that is taking their time trying to figure things out, there's somebody named Peter who has like 100 car washes in a metro area, is just unloading his money, and they're going to that university because of that. That team gets better within a year or two, and then players are looking at NIL, and then they're also looking at a successful program that's going to promote them and get to the NFL. So it's really interesting that some teams are going with the approach, let's take all the money as much as possible, buy these kids in a way that are interested in being bought. Some of the kids aren't interested in being bought, but there are some kids that are saying, hey, I'm going to take the check today, and they have their own reasoning for doing that. That doesn't mean they're bad kids or anything like that or bad families, but they're going to take it today, and they're going to play for a good team where they get enough of them. This team is going to be really good, and then it starts this cycle. See, that's one of the things about NIL and all this sort of stuff. If you think some schools don't get bad because they're in a machine, and there are some schools that are in a much lesser machine that they're never going to get good. They're never going to be able to recruit. They're never going to be able to be an upper echelon team in this conference. This is their reset button. This is their chance to go off the board, do something very creative or even controversial, because this allows them to get out of the basement and become a top echelon team. And what I'm seeing in college football and basketball right now is if somebody can have momentum for a year or two, and I think it probably takes 2 years, 2 years of solid momentum, you don't even have to pick up the phone because they're calling you. They want to be recruited by you. So some schools are going to do that, and the schools that wait around might be the most prudent when legislation eventually comes by. I'm just not sure when the legislation is coming, and meanwhile, they have found themselves going from the top to the bottom.
Yeah. So the way you've kind of framed that was, we got here, here's 2 years of sustained success, then other people will follow. So with Michigan's case, I can tell you that on the ground, what Michigan is doing is saying, come to Michigan, and in the NIL conversation is go, oh yeah, there's a lot here. Call JJ. Call the offensive line. Ask them how they're doing. But we're not handing you something when you get here. Now, that whole notion of the $40 or $20 to $40,000, that's a little bit of a difference, but it still requires work and things to be done behind it. We don't need to get into the details. But so there is no promise. There is no Texas A&M promise or guarantee if you come here, or the Florida quarterback, right, which fell through.
And Greg, I like that approach of what Michigan is doing in that way. It's a way of not having self-entitlement when you walk in the door. I think it's a healthier locker room. But at the same time, if you have a bunch of very highly touted, talented athletes, deferred payments or waiting until you've earned it on the college football field is a non-starter for some of these people because they can get paid right away for not doing anything yet other than just being a great high school recruit.
Yet we're number one right now in the 247 recruiting rankings, right? So we're having a lot of success. But I do think it's more, in fact, I had a conversation with someone very close to the recruiting process who said it's 60% winning. It's 40% having the opportunity for NIL, but it's still about walking into Schembechler Hall and seeing the picture of the flag planted at Ohio and the 2 Big Ten championship trophies. It's still about winning.
That's a diminishing number, though, to me. I mean, yeah, it's more than 50% plus one. It's the majority, but it seems to be decreasing in a bit in my mind. And I mean, I'm not saying rightly or wrongly. I'm just saying that I've seen schools and I'm seeing universities accept the chance at a reset button, knowing that they might pay the penalty for it later on. But for some of these schools, what's not to lose if you're at the bottom of the barrel trying to figure out your way to be a mid-level or an upper-level program?
No, and I'll tell you, it's, to me, especially true in basketball, because I feel like if you could get 2 pieces, you don't have to get 11 guys. You have to get a couple in basketball. I think there is an opportunity there. And, we had a really interesting NCAA tournament, and certainly I think NIL had an impact on it. Sam Webb, right? Miami making as far as they did. It's effectively a team created by NIL. Can they sustain that, to your point? And I think people will follow. Yeah, we'll see. What's funny is, to me, that whole cloud, though, behind NIL and what is the future going to be and what's going to be allowed and how are people going to be compensated holding some of the bigger donor backs, that's a Dooley theory. But, we just had the NFL draft, right? And actually College Game Day had a show before the NFL draft. What is the NFL draft? The product, the labor put into it is exclusively college football. And if we go to revenue sharing, right, I do see a day where if the money, the pie has to be split up and it just doesn't go to fund the athletic department and its coaches, right? I do see a day where the athletic departments are going to start looking up and looking around and going, okay, now that we're fair, NFL, is it fair that we don't get a dime, the athletic department, from all of the resources we've put in to feed your multi-billion-dollar enterprise owners? How much are the Commanders going for sale? Billions of dollars. Where's ours? Because right now, as it exists, none of this can happen without us. Yes, the players are getting theirs, the players who make it through. But what about the athletic departments that developed them? Very few people think that's a reality. I'm telling you, if you have to start sharing the Nike money and you have to start sharing the TV money and the Learfield money, the licensing money, athletic departments are either going to have to cut teams or they're going to have to go, hey, wait a minute, what about this? What about that? What about sending all these athletes to the Olympics that we fund right now and haven't really complained about? I do wonder if there'll be that day.
The Olympic committees may have to find a way to give some money, maybe, but the NFL doesn't. The NFL is going to rely exclusively on college football talent, but they'll say no. And college football programs won't cease to exist because the NFL said no.
Sure.
They'll continue to build their fortresses on college campuses. You've already seen programs across the nation come to the crossroads that they're losing more money than making money, but they decided to keep football because they actually figured out that having a football program might affect student enrollment. Just whether having one or not, even if it loses money, would affect student enrollment. And that's why you're not seeing very many schools just cut ties with Division I athletics. They're just not going to do it. So if the NFL says, no, we're not going to give you any money, I think college athletics is still going to be producing football and basketball teams.
They will. There could be a couple things that they could do if they did it collectively. But the problem they'll run into, to your point, is that they can't do it as far as to harm the opportunity of athletes to go to the NFL, right? What they could do is collectivize and go, hey, players, can we get together? Don't go to the draft until they pay us. Of course, that's not going to happen anytime soon, but that wouldn't be allowed. You can't stop their right to go to the NFL. I do think there's some other things they could do, but we'll see. Listen, the athletic departments have plenty of money, but they're a cartel. The NCAA and its teams are a cartel, an inefficient cartel, right? Where OPEC is a few countries that control the oil supply. This is over 1,000 schools with some rules that basically have built athletic departments effectively on the backs of free labor, and there's tons of money involved. Okay, but once you start taking their money away, you break that cartel by start to give some of the people doing the work some of that money in a significant chunk of it. They will start to crack. And you will see Michigan State canceled its swim and dive program a couple years ago. Not a lot of people talk about it. That's kind of a big deal. But by most standards, Michigan State is a healthy athletic department, but they basically said we're not healthy enough to support this team, right? So you'll start to see cracks like this if we go to revenue sharing. The reaction will be interesting is what I'm saying. So
you're listening to the Professor and the Pundit, Greg Dooley and Steve Clarke, and this is our initial podcast that we hope to be bringing out to you throughout the course of the summer and then eventually into football as well in the Michigan football season that we're all eagerly anticipating, and we'll be talking about that and a whole bunch of topics throughout the summer. But Greg, you were talking about the NFL draft that recently happened. I mean, both our wives we're looking at this, and it's kind of funny why they both have brought it up this year at the same time, because I've been watching the draft every year, I don't know, since my 20s, out of college, or watching it the 3 days, it used to be all in one day. I used to attend the NFL draft at the Pontiac Silverdome and have gone to NBA drafts in Indianapolis and things like that, it's like with a working credential. And when I'm not, I'm watching it on TV and I'm tweeting about it. And they looked at me, both my wife and daughter, it's like, what is the big deal? People are going crazy. People are dressed up like it's Halloween and they're cheering things. Why are they booing the commissioner? It's a habit. Everybody boos the commissioner. Well, why? Why did they boo the commissioner? And why is there so many people, Greg? How did this become big?
Is that Motley Crue? What are they doing there?
Yeah. This is absolutely ridiculous. And it's the same thing I got. Why the Super Bowl pregame show is 5 hours long, and why are there so many people attending a music concert before the Super Bowl? They're just all kind of like, and it's like they've only noticed it this year.
Well, it cracks me up, but there's a few elements to it, right? Like, wait a minute. 300,000 people attended in person? Like, what was the special experience in person, right, to go watch that? But honestly,
in their mind, there's 300,000 people have showed up to see a guy read an index card, and everybody goes, or boo, and it's like so totally foreign.
And of course the refrain from the how is this happening? Like, they've accepted that people are crazy about the actual games for whatever reason. Okay, we accept that, but this isn't a game. This isn't even really close to a game. Like, it's really completely different from what the NFL value prop is. But here we are. And I asked myself, I was actually thinking about this yesterday, what would I rather watch? Like, I'm a big golf fan. I love the major tournaments. I think it's compelling. I watch the Golf Channel break it down and Brando Chambly talk about the players, and I eat it up. Would I rather watch the second round of the U.S. Open golf tournament, or if I had to pick one, or the NFL draft? And I got to say, the draft is, for whatever reason, for nerds like us, is so compelling. I mean, it is. It's fascinating, and all the trades and stuff. And I'm not even I'm not depth chart guy in football teams. I can't tell you team strengths and weaknesses. I can tell you who's good and bad. And I have my teams. I love the Lions now, right? But it was fascinating. It's fascinating to me.
I will disagree somewhat with you in saying this isn't a game. It's a different game. It's not a game on the gridiron. It's a game of wits and smarts. And can I punk you in a certain way? And the other thing for Lions fans, if you're from the Metro Detroit area, this is your Super Bowl. And it's been said quite a bit. If the Lions were a perennial playoff team, and they only had one draft pick in the first round, and it was in the mid-20s, there's not much interest.
Yeah.
Not as much interest. But for the last couple of years, the Lions have had 2 first-round draft picks. And for how long has it been? 65, 66 years since the Lions have won an NFL championship. The Lions have been in rebuild mode.
Yeah.
And the fans have been in rebuild mode. And so the look to the future, it's not the games that look bright coming up. It's the future of hitting the reset buttons. Maybe we can acquire some players. And then the sub-games after that is trying to figure out whether your general manager is smarter than your rival's general manager.
Well, it's hope, Steve. It's hope.
Yeah,
but
hope.
It's very similar to Michigan football. Like if you polled Michigan football fans like immediately after another disastrous season as we've had in the last couple of decades, not these last years, they're down. You poll them in early August, man, hopes are high. Hopes
Right.
are high. Yeah, and I think it's a similar. It's definitely a big piece of fandom.
Well, when you lose, and almost everybody's a loser, essentially, some people would tell you there's only one winner and every other team is a loser,
Yeah.
and it's a failure. Your retort is wait till next year. That's
Yeah.
a decades-old long thing. Well, what's going to happen next year? Well, the retort to that is always the draft or recruiting.
Yeah.
Who's coming up? That type of thing. So the Lions traded Matt Stafford, and Stafford immediately wins a Super Bowl for the Los Angeles Rams. But, there's 2 future first-round picks that come with it, including their own. New general manager, people kind of warmed up to him, and then there is his 3rd year of picking drafts. In the first year, a couple players fell right into the Lions' lap. Penny Sewell, offensive lineman, considered one of the best players in the draft overall, fell to the Lions at number 7. This is great. Easy pick to make. The Lions actually got good news for a change. Usually it's Lucy in the football, pull it away, and something bad happens to the Lions. Draft day or on the field wise. And then, last year, people were lamenting they wanted Aiden Hutchinson. They wanted the local guy to play for the Lions, and everybody assumed he was going to be number 1. And then Jacksonville decided to think differently and pick somebody else up out of Georgia. And now Aiden Hutchinson's available. And so that was easy, and Aiden Hutchinson had a great year. Absolutely fantastic year once the second half of the season started. In between the first-round picks, Lions also got Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think that was a 4th-round pick out of USC, and he's played much higher than his draft level. This past year, there was Malcolm Rodriguez, 6th-round pick out of Oklahoma State, playing way above his level. Now
Rodrigo.
Rodriguez
He's been
from Hard Knocks. So
Yeah.
there's evidence that the Lions have had things go their way in the first round, and then they were able to find good players in the middle rounds or lower round and make them starters. So there was a lot of anticipation going on in this NFL draft to see how Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell was going to look going into it.
Yeah, I'm always interested because, Steve, when you go on WTKA, you're always commenting and observing draft order, draft consequences, and you know a lot about the players. You do a lot of research on this stuff, and I do not, right? I care less about, hey, draft order. I'd rather win the game today. I know people talk about tanking, all that kind of stuff. But I do know what I see, which are a lot of the Big Ten players, some of the players that we play in the playoffs. I did notice, by the way, did you see the teams with the most players drafted? Michigan, Alabama, Georgia, of course.
And Iowa?
No.
Because the Lions took plenty of Iowa players.
Guess who the 4th one was?
I don't know.
TCU.
Okay.
Only, I think Ohio State was after Alabama. So it was basically your Final 4.
Mm-hmm.
TCU, I think, had 8 players drafted. It was
I
7
see
or 8.
why.
Yeah. The receivers and everything. So I guess I'm not shocked. I don't know about their depth, but they obviously had some players. I feel like we should have won that game. We, Michigan, of course.
Max Duggan, Quentin Johnson, Steve Avila. They had a lot of first-team All-Big 12 players.
Right. So I'm looking at it, and I'm recognizing these names, these guys who excelled in the Big Ten. So I saw Aiden O'Connell went, right? And I felt like that made sense, right?
To the Raiders in the 4th round.
He seemed like a serviceable quarterback. Maybe he becomes an NFL starter. But that felt right to me, right, as I saw him. And I know running back's a weird position. So the first thing I did watching the draft, they picked Mr. Irrelevant, and I look, and I already know that all the guys that Michigan were hoping were going to get drafted, I think got drafted. I think all 9 that were on the primary board got drafted. Maybe I'm missing somebody, but I think that was it. So I looked at, okay, well, who are and there's a contract status. You can sign somebody, right? So who from that I know wasn't drafted? Mo Ibrahim from Minnesota, right? And I know running back's a weird position, Steve, but man, he was a great running back. And I know he's older, and I know the shelf life of running backs is limited. But the Lions signed him. Did you see that?
I did not.
Yeah, they
I
signed
took
him.
Saturday off. I kind of got done.
Yeah, so they signed him. We mentioned 9 guys from Michigan got drafted, and of course, Jake Moody got drafted. And that's always kind of a thing, is the kicker going to get drafted? He got drafted like 99. I think it was the Niners. But also, Brad Robbins, the punter, of course, got drafted. And they showed this clip of the actual phone call, the team's call, and they introduced him. So, hey, this is and I think the phone rings and he answers hello. Brad Robbins does, and the guy goes, hey, this is so and so from the Cincinnati Bengals. How you doing? And Brad Robbins goes, oh, hi, so and so from the Cincinnati Bengals. And it's clear that Brad Robbins thinks that someone's punking him or one of his buddies is calling him, because the guy, the GM or whoever from the Bengals, is kind of a younger guy. And it's pretty clear because it's this monotone, oh, hello.
So you got audio of Brad talking on this.
They had the video of the guy talking, but the full audio of the conversation.
Wow.
And the Bengals posted it on Twitter, and what they said, and at the end of the conversation, he swears. He says, like, oh, shit, or something like that at the end of the conversation, because he realizes, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to hang up now, and we'll send you some instructions on when to meet. And here's something, I'm paraphrasing, but it hits him that it's real. And so the Bengals tweet out, hey, at Brad Robbins, you didn't think this was a real phone call, did you? Or you thought you were getting punked. And in the thread, you just see like 5 people down, Brad Robbins, yes, with a laughing face. But it was a pretty cool moment. By the way, Rich Eisen took every chance to troll Ohio on the NFL Network telecast, which was amazing. Any way you could possibly do it, including the clip of DJ Turner running the 40-yard dash in Indianapolis, where Rich Eisen reminded everyone, a place he's very comfortable and familiar with. Right? Like,
love Rich Eisen. Thank you, Rich Eisen, for being the one guy. And he's not the one guy. Desmond Howard does it too. But the Michigan guys, when they're on TV, they are not.
They're not journalists.
No,
unabashed,
and they get away with it. And I'm so glad, because they're Michigan people. They are able to get away with it.
I love it. So, but I'm looking at like some of the others. So, who's the guy from Purdue? Charlie. What's his last name?
Charlie Jones.
He got drafted. Just so impressed with the guy in the Big Ten championships, and I saw, okay, yeah, maybe he's Julian Edelman. Something like that on a team, maybe a little more, But the running back thing always surprises me. Why wouldn't you have an Ibrahim on your roster? Again, there's probably a logical reason. I'm not smarter than the 32 NFL teams over 7 drafts. But just those things surprise me. Some of the standout players in the Big Ten.
One of the reasons why Blake Corum came back is that he needed to build up his professional reputation again. Not that he's a bad guy. He's a fantastic guy. He's an A-list guy. He's a football guy. But his season ended on a knee injury.
Yeah.
And I think Michigan football this season, that he comes back, he gets some credibility back when he comes in as a senior and starts doing the same things he did as a junior. And here's the other thing. I don't think he has to carry the ball this season as much as he did junior season, just enough to prove that he can do what he wanted to and what he was able to do as a junior. And then you can let Donovan Edwards get just as many carries and let him do his own thing. I think it can be a win-win for Michigan. Get both of those players to be productive, less tread on the tires for each of them, because I think probably the end of the 2023 season, both of them jump into the NFL draft.
Right.
And they'll have less tread on those tires. And for Blake Corum, he'll be able to say, look, I'm just as good now as I was last year. And so I think that's going to help him reputationally.
Yeah, and again, I know enough about NFL and running backs is that it's not, as positions go, obviously on an NFL team, having a good running back is very important. But the shelf life of the NFL running backs isn't very long. So the draft value of an NFL running back. So there are some people, some of the pundits I heard, they say, well, I would never draft a running back in the first round. I'm sure Blake Corum is getting that advice and got some of that advice. And I think your point is right about him not having to have as many carries. Just show he's the guy that we saw last year or better and healthy, and he's going to do fine in the draft. He's going to do fine. Well, and what we didn't talk about, I made the point about what are the recruits talking about. From what I hear, it's about winning championships. And yeah, we need to have a good NIL story, and maybe we can make that NIL story better. But I think one of the other things is they probably walk into Ben Herbert's office, the strength and conditioning coach, and I think he had a lot to do with all 9 Michigan guys who were on the main board getting picked up, because measurables do matter. They, as part of Herbert's workouts, they do track, measure the dashes, the shuttle runs. They do all that stuff inside Glick Fieldhouse, and that is part of their development. And it is intentionally, I believe, to be a let's get you ready for the draft,
right?
Kind of development process.
So here's one of the things, a little inside football. I hear more coaches about any position when they talk about I've got the best blank in the country. They don't say I've got the best defensive coordinator in the country. They don't talk about how they have the best offensive coordinator in the country. They talk about I have the best strength and conditioning coordinator in the country. And you can get away with saying that because there isn't statistics that go along with the strength and conditioning coach. You say I've got the best running backs coach in America, or I got the best offensive coordinator in America, people can just look up the statistics and go, no, he doesn't. He's just lying. You can't do that with strength and conditioning. You could just have to take the coach's word for it. So many coaches say, I got the best one in the country. And it's just one of those things they say. And it's also something that if you don't know, the strength and conditioning coach is probably going to know more about your kid than the head coach does, because the head coach is only allowed to see a player a certain amount of times during the offseason, where the strength and conditioning coach basically has no limit. And it's the strength and conditioning coach is going to tell the head coach, this guy works hard. This guy has been taking the season off. This guy has really been doing something in the weight room. This guy is a leader for the rest of them in the weight room and in the cafeteria and all that sort of stuff. Strength and conditioning coach, very, very important. But it is also the one guy that sees them more than anybody else.
Yeah, no, he is. And this is a little bit of a crossover, but I've actually had the pleasure of having Herb, as I call him, Coach Herbert, come, and he's been a speaker in the fall and winter semester in my leadership class, in my coaching by leading class. Well, how does he fit in? He's got an incredible message. Leadership, on personal accountability, on relationships, really on ego. It's fascinating. He's a really effective speaker. I bet not many people know that. And he really enjoys doing it and teaching people. And, in fact, got a chance to actually watch one of the workouts in the morning. I got to see some of the before and after photos of some of the players, and it's remarkable. It's remarkable. The detail, the precision in which he goes about his craft, it is infectious. And I can see that being a huge selling point. And to your point about those guys knowing more about those student athletes, knowing Herb and what he feels and believes in life, like he knows these kids well. And guess what? They're all supposed to be there. Basically, they do part of their workouts. Half the team goes in one interval, and then the other half goes. And they all basically do the same thing. I'm talking about Olu down to Jake Moody. They follow the same stations. Now, there's specialized workouts. They're all tracked and measured differently based on a variety of factors, which I don't understand. But, you know, they got to be there at 5:45 in the morning on a Friday. And, yeah, you get to know somebody intimately when you have that kind of rigor. And, by the way, that kind of team and pairing dynamic that they have, it's a fascinating thing. It's a fascinating thing to watch. And I'm so glad, and many of you probably know, he just re-signed for I think 5 years and a very lucrative contract. And I tell you what, I was excited because I plan on having him back in my class. I was excited because I go, oh, good. I have a chance to get Herb back in the fall to speak to my class because he's that good.
Right. And to my point earlier, Juwan Howard talks a lot about John Sanderson.
Yeah.
Too. And, I mean, you've seen the measurables and the photos and all that, too, about how a Michigan basketball player changes from freshman to sophomore year. It's usually that second year where you see dramatic increases.
Was he around for Stauskas? I remember that was one where it looked like the Tom Brady draft photo, like, oh, right, the draft, by the placard, here's Tom Brady. And then the next day he looked like Hercules, or the next year. So, yeah, it was great.
Greg, we've come about full circle. We managed to turn this back into NIL and a little bit about Michigan. And just like that, the first podcast for the Professor and the Pundit is over.
Sweet, man. We should talk about our sponsor, man, because we do have a presenting sponsor, which is kind of a cool thing to say. I'm joking. We're the first podcast that we figured out a recording studio, kind of got a name. We've got our friends from Underground Printing going to print us T-shirts. And we got a sponsor who's a friend of mine, become a friend of mine through Michigan, and that's Nick Hopwood of Peak Wealth Management, wealth advisors, investment advisors. Fantastic guy. I've actually been on his podcast before. And he's going to be a presenting sponsor for our podcast for the first season and hopefully beyond. And I'm just excited. And we may, depending on what you think, Steve, it'd be cool to have them, maybe included in some form or another down the road. And I think that'd be sweet.
It's one of our other passions is wealth management. We're the amateurs in this, but we certainly talk a lot about in our conversations privately about stocks and ticker symbols and
CNBC hosts.
Yeah.
We may have to nerd out on that or find a way to include that here. They actually did it's funny, there was a peer crossover. CNBC did their annual stock draft, and they always do it during the NFL draft. And of course, they're drafting
stocks and commodities and things like that.
But they had some celebrities on there. It was pretty funny. But no, Nick, I'm excited to have Nick Hopwood, Peak Wealth Management. You guys know he's been a sponsor on MGO Blog for a long time and other places, and a great dude. And by the way, a great team at his company whom I've met. Actually did a short presentation to some of their clients this summer, and it was, this winter, and it was fantastic. A lot of fun.
So that's Greg Dooley. I'm Steve Clarke. It's the Professor and the Pundit, our first inaugural podcast. So subscribe to our podcast in the future. You can be able to get it on Apple or wherever you get your podcast. But for now,
I'm Greg Dooley, the Professor.
And I'm Steve Clarke, the Pundit.
And we'll see you next week.